After Syria gained independence from France, the country was in a tumultuous state. After disagreements with the current government, a political party known as the Baathists seized power in a coup from the Second Syrian Republic on March 8, 1963. The Baathists are an authoritarian political party who believe in secularism, socialism, and pan-Arabism. After Syria's defeat in the Six-Day War against Israel in 1967, Syrian Air Force commander and Baathist Hafez al-Assad seized power in a second coup, starting 54 years of Assad control. The Assad regime was characterized by oppressive rule and terrorism. In 1982, the city of Hama, which held members of the Islamic Brotherhood who were protesting Hafez al-Assad's rule, was besieged and bombed by the Syrian army. The massacre killed up to 40,000 civilians, 20,000 more were disappeared by the government. This terrorism against civilians would come to define the Assad regime. Hafez died in 2000 and his son, Bashar al-Assad, took his throne. Bashar was a quiet kid who was eager to please people, and some thought he was unfit to lead. Despite these attributes, he would fill the shoes left by his father. Bashar had a strong grip on Syria, but in 2010, a Tunisian street vendor set himself on fire to protest Tunisia's government, starting the Arab Spring. The act of defiance led to protests across the entire Arab world, with 3 governments being overthrown and protests all across the region. The government arrested, killed, and disappeared numerous protesters and offered minimal concessions. Conscripted soldiers and even some high-ranking members of the military started joining the protesters, and eventually it became a full-scale civil war. Some of these high-ranking officers, along with many defected soldiers, started the Free Syrian Army, or FSA. The FSA's goal was to replace Assad and fulfill the demands of the protesters. They don't want to change core parts of Syria, they just want a democratic government. Due to the defections from the Syrian military, the FSA had lots of manpower, equipment, and skills. But as Syria descended into chaos, it became an opportunity for many groups of people to start fighting for what they believed would be the best fate for Syria. The Syrian Civil War is famous for the amount of factions fighting in it. There are many different factions, all with complicated alliances and ideologies, but I will only be going over the 4 major players. These are the Syrian government, the Free Syrian Army, the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The Free Syrian Army has splintered into many different rebel groups, all with very different alliances, but I'll be covering them all as the Free Syrian Army. The Syrian government is the original leadership of Syria trying to keep hold of their country. Led by Bashar al-Assad, their allies include Russia, Iran, and many different Iranian militant groups such as Hezbollah. The Free Syrian Army was originally the main military opposition with the objective of fulfilling the original protesters' demands and toppling the Assad regime, but has since decentralized into many different militant groups, all claiming to represent the Free Syrian Army. They are supported by Turkey. The Syrian Democratic Forces is a primarily Kurdish military and governmental organization in northeast Syria. They are one of the more stable of the factions fighting, and their goal is to create a Kurdish autonomous region in northwest Syria. They have been supported by the US and other Western nations, though this support is almost completely evaporated after the defeat of ISIS. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria started as part of al-Qaeda, but then declared Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi Caliph. Caliph is sort of like the Pope of Islam. This made al-Qaeda turn on them, and they have had just about no allies since, though they have branches in many different countries. Al-Nusra Front, and later Tahrir al-Sham, which is sort of a more Islamist version of the Free Syrian Army. Their allies was Turkey and allegedly Qatar. Russia, which has very strategically important military bases in Syria. Due to this, Russia tries to help the Syrian government as much as possible to keep control of their military presence. Turkey has Kurdish separatists in its eastern regions, and as such does not like the Turkish semi-state existing in northeastern Syria. While the SDF does not interact with the Kurdish separatists in Turkey, the Turkish government still fears that the SDF will inspire or directly assist the rebels in Turkey. Basically, the Syrian government, along with Iran and Russia, want to maintain the status quo and are directly fighting the FSA, ISIS, and the SDF. The FSA and Tahrir al-Sham are trying to fulfill the demands of the Arab Spring protesters and topple the Assad regime. They are fighting the Syrian government, ISIS, and the SDF. The SDF is Kurdish-led and trying to create an autonomous region in northeastern Syria. With some help from the United States, it is fighting the Syrian government, ISIS, and the FSA. ISIS wants to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq and eventually unite the entire Muslim world, and has just about no allies and is fighting everyone. In 2011, mass protests start against the Syrian government as part of the Arab Spring. The Syrian government violently cracks down on these protests. In 2012, high-ranking defectors from the Syrian government form the Free Syrian Army. Full civil war starts in Syria. In 2013, the FSA captured large amounts of territory in northern Syria. The SDF started gaining ground in northeastern Syria, and ISIS has started its first attacks. The Syrian government attacks Ghouta with chemical weapons, killing thousands of civilians. In 2014, the Syrian government held elections with more than one candidate for the first time ever. Bashar al-Assad wins the election. The election is accused of being rigged. ISIS starts making huge territorial advances in Iraq and Syria. The US starts intervention against ISIS with airstrikes and training and equipping SDF fighters against ISIS. FSA gains ground in southern Syria. ISIS reaches peak control, controlling over 1/3 of Syria. US continues airstrikes and kills important ISIS officials in raids and later deploys ground troops to fight ISIS with the SDF. Russia intervenes and starts airstrikes on FSA and ISIS targets. ISIS bombs a Russian plane, killing 224 people, and performs multiple attacks in Paris, killing 137 and injuring hundreds more. France retaliates with airstrikes on ISIS. In 2016, Jabhat al-Nusra changes their name to Tahrir al-Sham. SDF captures northeastern Syrian territory from the Syrian government. Turkey responds by starting Operation Euphrates Shield, which is an invasion to create a buffer zone between the SDF territory and Turkey. ISIS is driven almost entirely out of Syria. In 2018, the Syrian government mostly relegates Tahrir al-Sham and FSA to pockets in northwest and southern Syria. Syria attacks the city of Duoma with chemical weapons, killing dozens and injuring hundreds. In 2019, the US withdrew from SDF territory. After the US withdrawal, Turkey invades large parts of SDF territory. The US is criticized for abandoning the Kurds after using them to defeat ISIS. Leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is killed by US Special Forces. Turkey announces the resettling of 1 million Syrian refugees into captured Kurdish territory, and the SDF calls it ethnic cleansing. From 2020 to late 2024, there was very little major events or fighting happening. In late 2024, the FSA and Tahrir al-Sham captured Aleppo and vast amounts of territory from the Syrian government. Minor clashes between the FSA and SDF occurred at their border. The offensive continued pushing back Syrian government forces, nearly capturing the major city of Hama. About a week later, FSA from the south pushed north and SDF troops pushed west of the Euphrates, collapsing Syrian control of almost the entire eastern side of Syria. On December 8th, the FSA captured Damascus, officially ending 54 years of Assad control over Syria. What this new Syrian government will be like is still very unknown, but for the first time in decades, there's hope that Syria can finally be a democratic and peaceful country. This was an extremely oversimplified account of the Syrian civil war, glossing over many atrocities committed by all sides, many important factions, and general alliances between different factions, and also the military and other political events that happened. But the goal is for you to get a general idea of what the Civil War was about and how it all took place.